Accidents are never truly accidents. Even the discovery of an ancient mask filled with divine power can turn out to be just another trial in someone's life. Stanley Ipkiss is either incredibly lucky, receiving a force that could change the world, or he's a loser who became yet another puppet of an artifact created by a being dark enough to crave freedom. The film The Mask was released in 1994. Later, it received a sequel and even an animated series. But unfortunately, none of these projects ever explain the origins of the magical artifact. Who created the mask? For what purpose? When did it happen? And what secret does this object truly hold? Behind its familiar comedic surface lies a much darker story about a Scandinavian god who became the eternal prisoner of the mask. But why was the full truth hidden from the audience? In fact, the director originally planned to briefly show the artifact's backstory. In an early script and in rough cuts of the film, the story didn't begin with the bank or with Stanley. It opened with a prologue showing Vikings traveling toward the shores of America. They were the ones who buried the chest containing the mask and performed a ritual that prevented any ordinary, non-chosen person from finding the artifact, which means Stanley was the chosen one. The mask found Ipkiss, not the other way around. My name is Evgeny, and today we're breaking down the film The Mask, 1994. In this video, you'll learn what the artifact really is, who created it, and which god lost his power because of it. I promise, it's going to be interesting. Let's begin. So, I think we should start with the deleted prologue of the film, the scene that was meant to reveal the secret of the mask and its true origin. In the 10th century AD, Leif Erikson, one of the most famous Vikings in history, arrived on the shores of North America. He's often called the first European to set foot in the New World, doing so 500 years before Columbus. But this time, Erikson didn't come seeking new lands. Together with his warriors, he brought a metal chest to a foreign shore. Inside that chest, the mask was hidden. The Vikings quickly buried it, and a witch who traveled with them, named Volva Thordis, cast a spell. She spoke of the face of the god Loki and of his treacherous power sealed inside an iron coffer. The devil of lies must remain in an eternal sleep, and only a madman would dare awaken this curse. In Thordis's hands, we see an ancient parchment, and for just a moment, the audience can glimpse the text written in Scandinavian runes. I managed to partially decipher these runes, and to my surprise, what's written there is very different from what the witch says out loud. The parchment reads the following: "We have hidden the mask of Loki, for it brings chaos to mankind. Whoever finds it will lose their true nature and become a vessel for the god's treachery. Do not awaken the power that disrupts the will of light and the order of fate. Let the sea guard it until the end of time, until the worthy one, or a madman, claims it again." After the ritual, accompanied by the fury of the heavens, the Vikings hurriedly flee the new land, and in the very next scene, we are taken straight to Edge City in 1994. During underwater pipeline work, one of the divers discovers that very same chest, the one that had been lying beneath the water for nearly 1,000 years. But perhaps he wasn't the one meant to claim this find. Distracted for just a second, the diver gets caught under a falling pipe, and the mask breaks free from its iron prison. A short time later, it will be picked up by the man destiny chose deliberately, the perfectly unfortunate yet strangely worthy Stanley Ipkiss.
I got it!
Of course, this deleted scene would have helped us understand how, by whom, and when the mask was hidden on the shore near the city. We also would have known for sure that it contains the power of the Scandinavian god Loki. Although, to be fair, the film does mention that it's most likely Loki's mask. Remember what the expert told Ipkiss when Stanley came to him for help?
Loki?
The Norse god of mischief.
But it seems to me that this information is nowhere near enough to understand the full dark nature of this artifact. The film The Mask is based on the comic book series of the same name published by Dark Horse. And believe me, the movie strays far from its original source. On top of that, the comics never explain the history of the artifact. And if you read the film's script, unfortunately, there isn't much information there either. Scandinavian mythology itself contains no mention of any magical mask belonging to Loki. So we have to reconstruct the story from scratch. And as you've probably realized, everything began long before the Vikings ever set foot on the shores of America. I won't retell the entire mythological history. There's no point in that, only the part that helps us understand the true nature of the mask. That's why we need to go back to where the legend itself was born, into the harsh and majestic world of the Scandinavian gods. Loki is the god of deception and chaos. His tricks could help the Aesir, but just as easily place them in danger. But one day he crossed a line. He became the cause of Baldur's death, Odin's beloved son. After that, Loki was declared an enemy of Asgard, and he was forced to flee to the world of humans, where he hid for a long time from the wrath of the higher gods. On Earth, Loki did what he did best. He played with people, sowed chaos, and enjoyed the spectacle. But the longer he remained among humans, the more his pride grew, and with it, his thirst for power. This couldn't go on forever. The higher gods, however, were forbidden from directly interfering with the course of events. There were rules and a balance between worlds, and any intervention would lead to chaos and accelerate Ragnarok. But Asgard couldn't remain idle either. The first one to decide it was time to correct past mistakes was Odin, the supreme god. He had grown tired of Loki's constant mischief, and he had no choice but to intervene and help humanity. Odin descended into the world of humans, not as an all-powerful god, but in the form of a wandering traveler, seeking a worthy warrior who would not refuse his request. The only person capable of capturing Loki turned out to be Leif Erikson, a man unafraid of the god's wrath and possessing the strength of will needed for such a task. Odin gave Erikson clear instructions on how to lure Loki out and take his power. The first thing humans needed to do was create an object that reflected the very essence of the god of deception. His face, a mask. It had to become a trap. The work was entrusted to the greatest craftsman of that era, the blacksmith Volund. He carved the mask from ash wood, carefully following all of Odin's instructions. At the center, the blacksmith placed a metal plate with a fastening. No precious metals, no gems. Everything had to look as simple as possible so that in the eyes of ordinary people, the mask held no value. And once the mask was finished, the blacksmith handed it to Leif Erikson. Initially, the artifact had no magic of its own. It was merely a prepared vessel, a future seal meant to contain Loki's power. But to fully carry out Odin's plan, they also needed a special chest, one that would prevent Loki's power from influencing people. The god of deception was far too strong, a master of manipulation. The chest wasn't meant just to store the mask, it had to restrain the artifact's power. The second important step was to lure Loki into the open. The god of deception never appeared to humans in his true form. He always hid behind illusions, and there was only one way to force him to appear: a sacrifice. Erikson would have to offer someone close to him, cut out the heart with his own hands, and present it to Loki. According to the ancient rules, a Scandinavian god was bound to accept such an offering and appear to devour the flesh of a mortal. Even Loki was subject to certain laws. On top of that, the heart had to be poisoned beforehand with serpent venom. The poison, of course, couldn't kill a god, but it would weaken him, giving humans enough time to prepare the ritual. The Vikings had no goal of killing Loki. That was impossible for mortals. Their task was simply to hold him until dawn. At night, Loki possessed overwhelming power, but with the coming of daylight, his magic weakened, and he became vulnerable. This trait would later pass on to the artifact itself, because in daylight, the mask becomes useless. In the end, Odin's plan worked. With the first rays of sunlight, Loki's power began to fade. The venom spreading through his blood weakened his will and clouded his mind. That was enough for the surviving warriors to bind him and allow the witch to complete the sealing ritual. From Loki's crown, the warriors removed the seal and placed it onto the metal plate inside the mask. Then, following the incantations given by Odin himself, they put the mask onto Loki and directed the ritual to imprison all of his power inside the artifact. This didn't kill the god, but it stripped him of his strength entirely. The mask absorbed the energy of the Scandinavian trickster god. Loki himself was taken back to Asgard, where judgment awaited him, while Leif Erikson hid the mask inside the chest, crossed the ocean, and buried it in what he believed to be a secure place on the shore of the New World. And 1,000 years later, on that very spot, the city of Edge City was built. The origin of the artifact, as you can see, has nothing to do with the events of the film. That's why the creators chose not to spend screen time on it. But this story could have shed light on where the artifact truly came from, and we might have finally gotten answers to the questions left behind the scenes. Yet even this legend doesn't explain why the mask remained dormant for so long. For an entire millennium, it simply waited for its moment. Why was Stanley Ipkiss the one deemed worthy of its power? The mask didn't just choose him, it refused to leave its new host. When Ipkiss ends up on the bridge, we hear a storm approaching. But the moment he finds the mask, the storm abruptly disappears. From the larger story, we know that the mask is incredibly dangerous on its own and capable of manipulating people even without a host. But because it was locked inside the chest, its power couldn't break through the binding spells cast by the witch. The fact that the chest was discovered during pipeline repairs was pure coincidence. But once the artifact was freed, it could finally influence human consciousness. When Stanley stood on the bridge, we can see that the mask created the illusion of a drowning man. The artifact knew Ipkiss wouldn't ignore someone in need, but the moment he jumped into the water, the illusion vanished. All that was left was a pile of trash and the mask itself. Old, wooden, dirty, something that for an ordinary person had no value at all. And if the police hadn't shown up, Stanley was ready to put it on immediately. In other words, from the very first contact, the mask had already partially taken hold of Ipkiss's desires. And that explains the storm. It's like the anger of the heavens whenever Loki's power tries to break free. We see the same effect in the prologue with the Vikings, and later when Dorian gets his hands on the artifact. The second important question is this: why was Stanley Ipkiss the one deemed worthy of Loki's power? The mask doesn't choose just anyone. At first glance, Stanley is an ordinary, quiet, almost invisible man who constantly runs into problems. He's kind, gentle, and overly cautious, seemingly the complete opposite of the chaos that Loki represents. But here's the key point: the mask doesn't respond to strength or status. It responds to a person's inner nature. And inside Stanley lies exactly what the mask needs. He has an incredibly vivid imagination. Since childhood, he's been obsessed with cartoons, not simply as a viewer, but as someone who can mentally transform reality into animation. His fantasies are bright, expressive, and intense. But for many years he has suppressed all of that. Life circumstances, work, and constant problems forced him to bury his true self deep inside. And that is precisely why Loki's power resonated with Stanley Ipkiss, because the mask doesn't change a person, it only unleashes what already exists within them. Stanley isn't just a nice, polite guy. He's someone with a powerful inner world hidden beneath a modest exterior. A world overflowing with imagination, emotion, and unfulfilled desires. This contrast makes him the perfect host. When Ipkiss puts on the mask, his inner nature bursts outward, turning him into a living, cartoonish trickster, someone incredibly close in spirit to Loki. Even in his very first transformation, we see him spinning like a tornado. Of course, this movement is a direct reference to the Tasmanian Devil from the Looney Tunes cartoons. And that character appears on Stanley's pillow as well. Some scenes are borrowed almost directly. For example, Stanley's reaction when he first sees Tina. It's practically a frame-by-frame recreation of the classic Tex Avery cartoons, just like the wolf seeing Red Riding Hood for the first time. For Stanley, the real world literally becomes a cartoon. And this isn't just a stylistic choice, it's a reflection of his inner world. Every day after work, Stanley watched old cartoons. It was his small refuge from everyday problems, and that's exactly why the mask transforms reality the way he sees it. As a caricature, as cartoon chaos where the laws of physics and common sense simply no longer apply. For the same reason, when Dorian puts on the mask, his transformation becomes completely different. Dorian has no imagination, no love for cartoons, and none of the bright naive qualities that Stanley has. His inner world is dark, aggressive, and unforgiving, and the mask reflects exactly that. So instead of comedy, we see menace. Instead of cartoon energy, we see a frightening force that highlights his true nature. It turns out the mask is not a universal transformer. It simply removes the boundaries and reveals what already lives inside a person. And through that lens, it becomes clear why the two hosts look so different. One becomes a wild, cartoonish trickster, and the other a monster. But what about you? Do you think the mask's origin should have been shown on screen?